Welcome back to the show. I'm so excited to have everybody here today. So today we are looking at the question that is on everyone's mind. How is the Trump ticket handling the press versus the Harris ticket? Because that is something that has become incredibly stark over recent weeks. And I'm actually not certain that that's on everyone's mind, but it is on my mind. And I make the final decisions about what episodes we do. So buckle up. All right, guys, we got all of that in store for you today. But first, this is your reminder to like this video and subscribe to this channel. It truly does help me out a ton. I really appreciate it. If you are listening on Spotify, make sure you leave a rating and a review over there. All of my other social medias are linked down below, as always, if you want to check me out on any of those. And with all of that, my name is Noelle. This is Just Say No. Let's dive right in. Okay, so before we dive into any of that, I did want to briefly mention that this is the 40th episode of the podcast, which is insane. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who has listened so far, anyone who listens even semi-regularly. It truly does mean a lot. I appreciate it, and I'm excited to keep growing this platform and having you guys grow with me. So thank you. Enough of the sap. Let's yap. All right, so diving into this, I think we need to establish goals, or at least perceived goals, or what we can assume to be the goals of each campaign, because they are wholly different. Because here's the thing, everyone knows Donald Trump. He was president for 4 years. He was a worldwide celebrity before that. Opinions are already formed. Opinions of Trump are formed. So his goal in this is not to introduce himself. You know, he's just out there campaigning, kind of just doing Trump, kind of the exact same thing he has done for the last 8 years. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, needs to introduce herself. And every time she has tried to introduce herself, it has not gone so well. If you think back to 2019, when she ran for president in that election, as soon as the American people started understanding who this woman is, they bailed. They ran away and left her stranded, quite literally, on her little bus. And personally, I think that that's going to be a repeat. I think that is exactly the trend that we are seeing, because there is something that is so unbelievably unlikable about that woman. And she's also at another huge disadvantage, because policies that she has laid out in the past, I immediately think of things like mandatory buybacks or ending fracking, things like this that are incredibly unpopular with the American people, that she was staunchly in favor of in previous elections that she has run in. She's now running away from those policies. And you will see, if you watch any of her interviews, if the interviewer is worth anything at all, and none of them are, but if they're worth anything, they have at least tried to ask her about this. Why have you changed your mind on literally everything? And her standard answer is, say it with me, well, I grew up in the middle class. My mom, she was so poor she couldn't buy her own house until I was a teenager. And that's about as much as we're getting from Kamala Harris. And it turns out that the American people don't love that. It turns out it's not really the vibe, actually. It turns out the vibe isn't, in fact, vibing. And that was supposed to be the thing to carry her to the end. And it simply isn't, because she's horrible. So over the past couple of weeks, Kamala Harris has done her media tour. Let's just call it that. Because for the longest time in this campaign, she hadn't done any press or any media. I think it was the first 45-ish days of her campaign. She didn't do anything whatsoever. And they're dragging her out now. She's done Call Her Daddy, 60 Minutes, Stephen Colbert, Howard Stern, The View, Oprah, maybe more. But at the time of filming, that's where we're sitting. And there's a lot of talk about her doing podcasts. And to be fair, Trump has done quite a few podcasts. In fact, I would say that has been his primary form of campaigning this time around. He just recently did Flagrant. He did Theo Vaughn, Aiden Ross. Dr. Phil isn't a podcast, but similar. Dave Ramsey. But on top of the podcast, he's also done a couple of press conferences, which Kamala Harris has yet to do one. The election is in 15 days? About 15 days, I think, when this episode comes out. The election's in about 15 days. And as of filming, she has not done a single press conference. That is so insane. That I don't know that you guys understand how insane it is that she hasn't done a press conference. But all of this to point out the fact that I feel like I'm seeing, and a lot of people are seeing, a trend away from mainstream media. We are doing a lot more podcasts, a lot more YouTube videos, a lot more of this style of campaigning rather than doing the 60 minutes. Now, Harris did 60 minutes and it did not go well. And Trump got a lot of flack for doing 60 minutes. And to be honest, his reason for not wanting to do it is because when he went on it in 2020, he sat with Leslie Stahl and she insisted that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian misinformation, among other things. He wants an apology because that was false. And there's a high likelihood that that interfered with the election. I would stake a lot on the fact that claiming the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian misinformation interfered with the election. And I think it's very on brand for him to refuse to do it on such merits. I'm just going to leave that at that because a lot of people are like, well, Trump won't do the 60 Minutes interview. And I'm like, I wouldn't either if I were him. Kamala Harris wouldn't have either if she had known that they weren't going to be nice to her. Now, speaking of her doing things where they're not nice to her, there are rumors that Trump is going to be on Joe Rogan's podcast. It hasn't happened at the time of filming. If it does, I will make an episode about it. But there are also rumors of Harris going on Rogan's podcast as well, that started circulating this morning. We will see. I would be shocked to shit if Kamala Harris went on Joe Rogan because he does not like her and he wouldn't let her weasel her way out of these questions he won't accept. I grew up in the middle class. So we'll find out. We'll stay tuned. I'll do an episode if Trump goes on it. I will definitely do an episode if they both go on it. So make sure you're subscribed for that. Keep an eye out. So if we just look at the numbers, the Trump-Vance ticket has done probably double, if not more than double, the amount of press interviews than Harris-Walz. And now that Harris is hitting the press tour super hard, we can see why. We can see why that those numbers were so low and why they tried to keep her in the basement. So first things first, we gotta look at the question of why. Why are they suddenly trotting her out, making her do all of these interviews, especially when she's so bad at it? So I have a personal theory, and then there's the more widespread theory. My personal theory is that she is Joe Bidening herself. One of Joe Biden's biggest pitfalls is that man sincerely believed that he could. He sincerely believed that he was capable and able of being president, and he wasn't. And I put Kamala Harris in that exact same camp. I have a feeling that her advisors around her are saying, Kamala, you're not good at this, and maybe don't. And she thinks that she is the shit. She is a Black female presidential candidate after all, obviously. Or is she Indian? We don't know. I'm kidding, of course. But the reality is that the American population loses collective IQ points every single time that she speaks, and everyone is aware of this except for her. Similarly, everyone was aware that Joe Biden is in mental decline, except for Joe Biden. Maybe he forgot because he was in mental decline. He keeps forgetting such a thing. But the point here is that I think she's Joe Bidening herself. Another potential explanation is that her team sees the horrible numbers because the presidential campaigns get more accurate polling numbers than what the public gets. They can, I don't know how they do it. If they have their own polls that they put out, either way, they tend to have more accurate numbers, a more accurate idea. And their polling numbers must be truly abysmal because they are last resort putting her out in front of the press. And this one kind of makes sense, I suppose. I just don't know in what world putting her in front of the press helps, except for the fact that one of their public's biggest gripes is the fact that she won't talk to the press. So maybe they're hoping, but it appears that it has just made things worse because, as I said at the top, when the American public gets to know Kamala Harris, the American public leaves Kamala Harris. And that is exactly what we were seeing. Polls are reflecting that the honeymoon phase is coming to an end, which I predicted as soon as she got announced. When she first got announced, everyone was really excited to not have a dead person running, and so her poll numbers were doing really well. And then she opened her mouth, and they heard what she had to say, and that cackle was present in our lives once again. And everyone needs to remember that before she was announced as the nominee, she was the least popular vice president in American history. And all of a sudden, she was one of the most popular vice presidential candidates? I don't think so. I simply don't think so. Regardless of the reason that she's doing it, she's doing it. And unfortunately for her, she's just unlikable. And you know what? Donald Trump is also quite unlikable. He is quite unlikable. But as we discussed at the top of the episode, this is established information. The people who dislike Trump or were gonna dislike Trump dislike him already. Opinion is formed. Everyone knows who he is. People are just now realizing that they dislike Kamala Harris, and that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem, especially with how close the election is. All right, so that was quite the preface, but I want to get into the interviews themselves, highlights, lowlights, and public perception. Let's call it at that. So to draw some initial parallels, Kamala Harris went on the Call Her Daddy podcast with Alex Cooper, if you didn't hear about that already. And to give you an idea, this is a sex podcast. Plain and simple. 2 episodes before Kamala Harris was on was titled, quote, Blowjobs, Hall Passes, and Frat Daddies. And that is the podcast that our presidential candidate was on. That makes sense. And she was on it for about 40 minutes and spent almost the entire time talking about abortion and women's rights, because that's the only thing that women are supposed to care about is the right to kill their baby in the womb. No woman would ever possibly, care about the economy or the housing market or the border or foreign affairs or any of that kind of stuff, because abortion. And unfortunately, although this was pre-recorded, and even pre-recorded, it couldn't have been more than a couple of days in advance. She did this right in the middle of Hurricane Helene, right before Hurricane Milton, and public perception, not good. Not good. Maybe if you're the sitting vice president going on a sex podcast while there are actually states underwater, not the best move. But who am I? Who am I to make that judgment? We'll let the American people make that judgment. And when I say, I'm gonna repeat this over and over again. Public perception is 90% of this election. 90% of it. And the public perceived this super badly because this was just the start of her media tour, and it got worse from there. Now, to be fair, let's do our best to draw a parallel softball, let's call it a for fun interview, right? Because I'm going to call this a for fun interview because there were no actual, dare I say, important things discussed. And I know I can hear women screaming, my rights. I stand by it. I stand by what I said. In an effort to be fair and to draw a parallel, let's call Trump's for fun softball interview his Theo Von interview. And the reason I picked this one is because they did talk about, he hasn't gone on a podcast where they don't talk about like the economy and the border and everything, because those are Trump's most important issues. Like those are the issues that are most important to him, which are also happen to be the issues that are most important to most Americans, but who am I? And they spent a lot of time on that particular podcast talking about drug addiction, because Theo Von used to be a drug addict. Trump's brother died of alcoholism, I believe. Maybe it was, I don't think it was drugs. I think it was just alcohol. And so they have that in common. And so they discussed that more than they discussed other things. And it's just the closest one that I can find that he did that is as off topic, let's call it, as the Call Her Daddy podcast. And I hate to be that person, but just like the immediate parallel of Kamala Harris going on a sex podcast to talk about abortion and Trump going on Theo Von to talk about drug addiction. Wow. Choose your character, folks. Kamala Harris did her town hall with Oprah. We discussed this last week or the week before. I cannot remember anymore. And as we discussed it, she spent the whole time fraternizing with celebrities who were just telling her how great she is and how excited they are to endorse her. And she took a couple questions from the American public and skirted every single one of them. Friendly territory. Trump did his town hall last year with Caitlin Collins on CNN. Do these two things seem the same to you? Do these two things feel equal? I don't think so. Now, to be fair, they both have agreed to do another town hall with Univision, so we'll see how those turn out, but we got to move along. One thing we can always count on is to never be bored when we're talking about The View. Now, Kamala Harris went on The View, and this, well, it was a softball interview. They introduced her as the future president, of course, and it was just a bunch of women, being girls, hee hee, ha ha, how fun and cute. They were so far up her ass the moment that she walked out on that stage. And yet they somehow created the worst clip for her on this campaign trail, potentially. They asked her a simple question, a softball question, something that should have been easy breezy, beautiful cover girl for Miss Kamala Harris. Is there anything, Madam Vice President, that you would have done differently than Joe Biden? Because this is supposed to be a change election. The American people want something different. And this is where Kamala Harris started out in the advantage. Because while she is attached to the Joe Biden ticket, she herself is not Joe Biden. And she herself is not Donald Trump. And so that was supposed to be appealing to the American people. And all she had to say was, I mean, anything. There's such an array of things that she could have said that could have potentially sunk Donald Trump. What does she say instead? She says that nothing comes to mind.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Madam Vice President, what are you going to do differently from the current president that America absolutely hates? What are you going to do differently? Nothing comes to mind. When I say this woman is so unbelievably incompetent, that felt like a blessing from God. I'm not even going to lie to you guys. Nothing comes to mind. Girl. Now, later that evening, she was on Stephen Colbert. She cracked open a beer and was just chillaxing, as they say. And obviously, this was an opportunity to rectify her mistake from earlier that morning. And I have a feeling that this question wasn't originally supposed to be asked, but since she fumbled so hard on The View, they threw it at her again because he asked her once more, what's going to be the difference from you and Joe Biden? What's the change here? And once again, set up for a slam dunk answer. What does she say, though? She says, well, I am not Joe Biden. And I think that it's important to say that I am also not Donald Trump. Now, of course, the crowd goes wild because they're retards, and the clip goes viral because the internet is retarded. But she said nothing. How are you going to be different? Well, I'm not Donald Trump and I'm not Joe Biden. You tell me. You know what? You tell me. You tell me exactly what that's supposed to mean. I'm physically not the person. Aren't you, though? Like, isn't that kind of the whole point? Isn't the kind of the whole point that you are a empty suit, an empty vessel, as they say? Isn't that like exactly what Joe Biden was? He was literally, he's DOA. He's not with us anymore. He's not the one in charge, and neither will she. So if you want things to change, I suggest not voting for the person who's going to keep the establishment in power. I'm tossing that one your way. You think about it. We've talked a lot about Kamala Harris's greatest hits from the last week, and I'm going to be honest with you. It's kind of hard to do greatest hits from Donald Trump because every interview he goes on is basically copy and pasted. It's pretty much the same. He gives his long-winded, roundabout answers about the border and the economy, and sometimes he throws in a new policy or a new endorsement or something like that, but they're all kind of the same. They're not impressive. By no means am I ever like, wow, that was really articulate. Stunning work from President Trump. No, that's not happening. But what is happening, miraculously, is Kamala Harris is somehow so much worse that it's totally overshadowing the fact that Donald Trump is simply not serving us anything. So that's just the way that's going. And don't shoot the messenger. I'm just observing the facts on the ground because, like I said, I have watched his podcast. I've watched Kamala Harris's podcasts. And while Trump is not necessarily Edgar Allan Poe out there, Kamala Harris is, I can't even think of a comparison. And on that note, let's discuss public perception. Because like I said, that is what this election comes down to. Because neither one of these candidates are exactly like serving it up big time. Now, in Trump's benefit, he does have 4 years of a good economy, a safe border. So he's just relying on that. And he can, and it's working. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, she doesn't have anything to lean on, and she's not giving anything either. And I think that's why her poor performance is outshining Trump's. But let's see how the public feels about this. Now, I wasn't sure how to gather this information, how to get kind of like put a number to how the American people are feeling about these two candidates besides polls. And then I realized that we could look at YouTube videos. So that's exactly what we are going to do. We are going to look at different screenshots that I took of the different shows that these two candidates have been on. And our metrics are how many views do they have? And what are the like to dislike ratios on these videos? Now, all of these screenshots were taken on October 9th, because that's when I started putting this episode together. So let's get into it. So starting off with Kamala Harris on Call Her Daddy. Now, this show, I believe, is a Spotify exclusive. So we don't know how many views the actual podcast itself got, but judging off of the YouTube clip and judging off of all of the other things that she's been on, I'm assuming it's going to be around similar numbers, right? So the YouTube clip has 475,000 views with 13,000 likes and about 60,000 dislikes. So that is what we call here on the internet ratioed to hell. Absolutely to hell. Now, Call Her Daddy has 986,000 subscribers and averages about 100,000 views an episode. So it did perform better than other episodes that she has put out, or clips of episodes, but it's also not the best performing one by any means. So there's that. Now let's hop over to Trump on Theo Vaughn. This video has 13 million views, 425,000 likes, and only 14,000 dislikes. Now I would say that is that like to dislike ratio is fairly average. I don't know what the exact percentage is, likes to dislikes on that, but it's I would say that's pretty average. Now, Theo has 3 million subscribers and he averages about 1 million views an episode. So this vastly outperformed his usual. That's our starting metric. Next, we have Kamala Harris on The View. This video got about 500,000 views with 14,000 likes and 16,000 dislikes. So once again, we are outpaced here by the dislikes. Now, The View has 1 million subscribers. And on the broadcasts of their show, they get about 250,000 views each. So again, somewhat higher than the usual viewership, but not by that much. Let's compare this with Trump on Dr. Phil. His episode on Dr. Phil on YouTube got 17 million views with 234,000 likes and only 7,000 dislikes. Those are some astounding numbers, if I do say so myself. And Trump actually went on Dr. Phil twice. His second episode got 2.7 million views with 37,000 dislikes and 565 dislikes. Not 565,000, just 565. Now, Dr. Phil only has 354,000 subscribers, and he averages about anywhere from 10 to 50,000 views per video. So yeah, this definitely outperformed his usual, and it simply isn't close. All right, next up, Kamala Harris went on All the Smoke podcast, and this episode has 477,000 views with 26,000 likes and 60,000 dislikes. Y'all. Now, this podcast has 1 million subscribers and they average about 50,000 views an episode. So definitely on this one, she outperformed. She did very well, but she got more than double the amount of dislikes. And that's, believe it or not, it does say something. It does say something. And I am trying to do my best to do like for like podcasts here, but there's only so much you can do. Now, Trump was on Aiden Ross's live stream. Let's call it about 2.5 million views. Now, I don't know if that was like on the actual live stream itself or if that was views after it got uploaded. I don't know, but we're going to call it the 2.5, which is low for Trump. That is low viewership for Trump. And it has 170,000 likes with 6.3 thousand dislikes. So once again, we're in average range there, I would say. Are you seeing a trend? I'm seeing a trend. So we could go on, but I think you get the point. And to be totally fair, I will give Kamala Harris this. Her episode with Stephen Colbert has performed way better than any of her other videos by far. It has over 1 million views with 46,000 likes and only 1.9 thousand dislikes. So that is a very normal like to dislike range, a normal ratio. So there you go. Congratulations. Now, why are we discussing this? Because it matters. I don't want the American people to be fooled. If you listen to the media, you will hear that Kamala Harris is winning. She's doing great. She's the greatest thing to actually ever happen to America, actually, if you weren't aware. And simply, it's just not the case. If you were to talk to an average working class American, they wouldn't feel that way. And I think that the way that each candidate's interviews are being perceived and received by the public is an indicator of that. And as I said earlier, I strongly suspect that the honeymoon phase for Harris is over. I just do not think that she is going to pull this off. I would be shocked to absolute shit if come November 6th, Donald Trump is not our president. But with that said, this is your reminder to go out and vote. Early voting has started in most states. I will put a list up here somewhere for early voting dates in the states where it hasn't already started. But in most states, it has already started. Make sure that you go get your vote in. If you are busy, if you work, anytime you are able to go get your vote in, please do not think that your vote does not count. It does. Every single vote counts. This is it. He's been saying it over and over again, but this election needs to be too big to rig. It needs to be a landslide. So make sure you go vote. And with that, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I appreciate anyone who listens to this podcast. It means a ton to me. And I will chat with you guys next Monday. Bye.